everyone, my name is Kate McCabe and I am Assistant Head Teacher at City School in Oxford, and my talk today is on the challenge of writing in English and across the curriculum. Really, this is going to be less about sort of teaching tips and teaching resources, and I suppose more of a reflection on what some of the problems, what some of the barriers that students might meet are, and how we can help them, what we can do about it, and create kind of conditions in the classroom to try and prevent those barriers from staying. So, first of all, what is the problem? What is one of the problems with writing? So, in my work as SLT and as a literacy lead and raising standards leader for Key Stage 4 and 5, one of the things that we noticed was the amount of incomplete written work in books. Poor performance in summative assessment, no attempted responses, this idea of self-sabotage, and teacher frustration, where teachers couldn't understand why they taught students to do something and then they wouldn't do it, or when they taught students to do something, set them off independently, students just kind of start to lose focus, become distracted and start talking. Or you get the kind of classic call for sentence starters, even though you've just spent about an hour talking through students exactly what they need to do. So that led me to think about the cause of this, why this happened. And I think I've boiled it down to three main things. The challenge of writing, so why writing is so challenging and the different processes that students go through. The role of motivation and how motivation can help or hinder students' writing, and the quality of modelling, but not just the quality, I think also the type of modelling that's being used at specific points in that process of writing. And when we started to look at the challenge of writing, I think a really good place to start is Key Stage 2. And I think it's fair to say that that these are some of the tasks that are typical in Key Stage 2 writing, that we might consider them to have high tariff. And then these are some of the tasks that we would consider to have high tariff in secondary writing, in Key Stage 3 and 4. And there are a number of ones that are particularly important to English that we know students may have had less experience of, less exposure to in Key Stage 2. So things like analytical writing, things like evaluation writing, summary writing, and so on. So what that then creates is this sort of this gap between what we're expecting of students to do and what they're able to do. So if we have a look at compare and contrast, these are some of the things that students are being required to do when they, all of the different elements, when they pull together a compare and contrast piece of writing. So we need them to have knowledge of the content that's going to go into that piece of writing, to know the vocabulary, to have a sense of the internal structure of the text type, so to logically understand about the organisation, to have a sense of the sentence structure, and also to have a sense of how a compare and contrast is different to other kinds of text. And then if we add Key Stage 4 to that, and we start to think about how a compare and contrast text might specifically relate to an exam question and the assessment objectives and the specifics of that question. We also have exam timing and the exam conditions. I think we start to get a much clearer picture of exactly what it is students have to do when they pull that piece of writing together. So what we then find in Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 writing is that students do not have a rich network of examples. They've got this weaker frame of reference and they don't have that sense of automaticity to ease the burden. And because they don't have that automaticity, they are more likely to reach capacity in terms of this kind of overcrowding and this overloading of tasks that need to be done simultaneously. And if capacity is reached, ideas will be lost and short-term goals forgotten. And I think we see that so clearly when students, when we taught them what to do and they have a piece of paper or their book and they say, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I think that's, evidence of that losing of the sense of your purpose and what it is you need to do. So key considerations then: students are novices, not experts. And part of being an expert is that you have this well-connected network so that one piece of information can serve to retrieve the entire pattern. And when I think about compare and contrast, and if I think about the phrase, in complete contrast to something, that's already fired off in my brain a sense of the logic of where that piece would come, what's come before it, what needs to come after it. And that's a sort of, that's evidence, I think, of having internalized that structure, because I'm very familiar with compare and contrast text and other kinds of text. And I think that's what we need to help students develop. And this idea that having high expectations means that we should demand that students be able to do this kind of thing. But unfortunately, we sometimes miss the mark, and those high expectations are actually unrealistic expectations. And we need to go much further in helping students internalize what to do for some of these text types. So that kind of sense of high expectations and unrealistic expectations also links onto this idea of motivation and how if the expectations are unrealistic, we may then find a lack of motivation or a lowering of motivation, or actually, to put it slightly more correctly, a misdirection of motivation. And the work on motivation that I've done comes out of some unit on my master's study, but also kind of listening to some of the things that Caroline Spalding has done. And certainly from my own reading, these are two quotations that really stuck with me. And the first one is that the writing environment is one with high variability and low predictability and little opportunity for learning. In other words, it's just the act of writing is quite a high stakes thing to do. That commitment to paper, which is how it's often perceived by students. I think it's our job as teachers to try and ensure that we make it as predictable as possible, and we consciously and deliberately try to kind of lessen that variability and increase the predictability. And this second one from Ian Thompson, that for the reluctant writer, the process is always traumatic. And, I think if we really stop and think about that, and then think about our students with low esteem and low academic esteem, I think we can see very clearly why some students refuse to write and find it very difficult to start writing. And this is also sort of explained, I think, when we consider the word motivation coming from motivus, Latin to mean moving. But of course, that doesn't necessarily specify which direction into moving in. So what we can find is that those students who are, have their head on their desk and are refusing to write, they are in fact highly motivated. They are, very deliberately and energetically moving in a direction. It's just the direction to avoid, to defend themselves, to protect themselves against the traumatic experience that Thompson talks about. And I think when we start to see those actions as being sort of fueled by an energy, I think it then becomes easier for us to think we can work on changing that. We're not talking about students with no motivation. We're talking about students with a kind of deliberate negative motivation, and we need to help them sort of feel more comfortable, raise the predictability of the writing process, and help them become more comfortable in putting pen to paper and trying. And I loved listening to Jennifer Webb's talk the other day, where she spoke about, start with the literal. That's a really good way of helping some students who find writing difficult, particularly for literature. If you start with the literal stuff, what actually has a character done? How have they actually done it? It sort of releases some of that variability and unpredictability about, the anxieties that they might have about their ideas and so on. So, to sort of summarise, I suppose, the ideas about motivation, because there's been a lot written about motivation and decades worth of work and all kinds of different theoretical approaches to it. But I think the two things that came out of all of my reading about motivation are these two critical conditions that seem to appear time after time after time, that students have to perceive that they can be successful, and they also have to perceive that we care and that their effort matters. And I think we need to just check and ask ourselves as teachers, have we created a classroom environment and condition for students to be successful? Have we set things up? Have we given them enough examples to make sure that they can be successful? And have we created classroom conditions where we are going to respond to their writing and to their effort with enough momentum and with enough pace so that they can see that we care and that we're responding to them? Linked to motivation and linked to this idea of the challenge of writing is modelling. If students, if they need to perceive that they can be successful, they need to be able to see what it is that they need to try and achieve. So I sort of strongly agree with and applaud the I, we, you process, and think that we can divide that I stage, that teacher guidance, into two parts, into the process way of modelling and the product way of modelling. And I think both have value. I think there's been sort of debates on Twitter over the years about how, it's only the process that's important. We need to show students how we get somewhere. And other people really champion the product sort of method. And I know Mark Roberts was talking the other day at the Seneca English Conference about some of the excellent work that he does with exemplars and how he uses them in his classroom. And personally, I think both are really important. I think we have to show students what it is that we need them to do, what it looks like. I think they've got to internalise the big picture, as well as start looking at all of the steps that they've got to go through along the way to get there. Also, along with that, along with the process and the product, what the good ones look like, I think it's really important that we bear in mind that we have to show students non-examples as well. And these non-examples are talked about so excellently by Adam Boxer and co. in Explicit and Direct Instruction, the Research Ed Guide. And they talk about this chapter which talks at length about the use of non-examples to show the limits of a concept, and that it's only really by understanding what something isn't that students start to develop this really embedded and deep knowledge about what something is. And so a couple of examples of non-examples in English could be showing students analysis that is descriptive rather than analytical, and showing students the use of a simile perfectly placed but is a cliche, or showing students the use of the phrase evidence for this is to discuss quotation, and then showing them actually what it should look like. And I think that this is really important. One of them was probably one of the most important lessons I do in Key Stage 4 towards the start of Year 10 is to show students a response to an exam question that is just one paragraph, so a single paragraph, and show them an example of that response that is a grade 3, that is grade 5, and that is a grade 7. And so students start to see really clearly what the difference is, and in a sense the kind of how the grade 3 is a non-example of a grade 5 piece of work, and how the grade 5 is a non-example of a grade 7 piece of work. So they get to see very clearly the distinction between them. So I mean, after the sort of very teacher-guided phase of looking at products and processes and walking students through what they are doing, I mean, I think probably the most important bit is this we stage, the bit where teacher and student begins to work collaboratively on the ideas, the organisation, the selection, the evaluation of the importance of those ideas, and students start to verbalise some of their misconceptions and so on and so forth. So the we stage, this needs the most time, walking students through the process with you and taking their contribution. And Rosenshine says the most successful teachers spend more time in guided practice and have higher success rates. I think central to this sort of we stage, to support that challenge of writing and to do the modelling of stages that you're going through, and to verbalise the choices and the decisions you're making, and selection and evaluation and so on and so forth, is this idea of classroom talk. And I think this is really important. Given that novice writers spend less time planning their writing, and I don't think we're talking just about, the very functional plan for your question 5 AQA. I think this is the planning and your ideas collection and your planning and your organisation of your thoughts as well. Given that novice writers spend less time planning their writing, and males spend less time still, based on this research from Gamble and Hunter, a routinely embedded period of collaborative classroom talk to discuss writing before beginning the process is key to moving students from novice to expert. And given that we also know that there is a gender gap between males and females, certainly in subjects with a high writing outcome, English amongst other subjects, this is really important, this we stage where ideas are discussed, considered, noted down, selected, evaluated for their usefulness, and so on and so forth, is really important. And this bottom quotation comes from a whole range of student voice research, where students are asked, given questionnaires and asked, what is the thing that helps you learn the most in the classroom? And without doubt, discussion, an opportunity to talk, seems to top those lists. Excuse me, time and time again. So we need to take talk for writing really seriously, and we need to give students as much opportunity to discuss their ideas. And here are, I'm just going to move myself, here are some of the ways that that I have done that in the classroom. So poetry debating, which is an idea that I stole from Twitter. Taking the kind of formal approach of a debate, but just giving it to students and getting one side to argue for one poem and the other side to, or another student to argue for another poem. So this house believes that the relationship in Letters from Yorkshire is more likely to survive the distance than the relationship in Sonnet 29. If students know their contextual knowledge, then they'll know how long Barrett Browning and Browning were married for. This house believes that the farmer shows more respect and empathy towards women than the speaker in Love's Philosophy. And again, it's really about getting students to pick up on the nuances and the very subtle evidence that exists within the poetry to use as evidence to support their point of view and to discuss it. So that I find always goes down really well, very really valuable task for students to do. Another task that I get students to do is work on the 10 whys, and this is something I came up with a couple of years ago to sort of prioritize and front load texts with some of the big ideas of author intention, really sort of before and during the reading rather than at the end, so that if you're thinking about the fact that Priestley might be using Gerald to represent how privilege is used to escape consequences, then students are sort of locked in and looking for that evidence. They are kind of considering how the text is used as a vehicle to put across a point of view. If we are, thinking about how Stevenson might be reflecting on the role of privilege, indulgence, and ego in self-destruction, then we are looking at Jekyll in maybe a less sympathetic way. And we don't see him as a victim throughout the whole, just to have your teacher then say, I don't think he was a victim, do you? We're actually looking at that the whole way through the text. So really, some of these discussion ideas are getting students to verbalise and to think about some of the more complex things that can go into their writing the whole way along their sort of content learning. Expand and link it. We're just about to launch knowledge organisers across the school. That's been a piece of work I've been working on, and as much as I kind of think they're very valuable in terms of knowledge, I actually think that they're going to be really valuable, I hope so, in terms of prompting classroom discussion and conversation and expanding ideas. So students have a theme, and their job is to expand that label of that theme and talk about it at length with a partner about where the evidence is for that theme, how that theme relates to context, and so on and so forth. And then the final one, which is a routine that is fairly well embedded now in my classroom, and that is ready to write or speak your paragraph. And I think it's quite it's quite a rigorous task to do, and it's really training students before they write to actually verbalise their paragraph to their partner, and for them to collaboratively construct the partner, not by writing anything down, but just to say it to each other, so they start to become more aware of hearing how fluent it sounds, and they start to block chunks of sentences together and start to hear some of those ideas, which I think is really important. So it's not just in a written format, which can sometimes be quite loosely organised. And I think when they say it makes them think much more deeply about the organisation. So at the end of the I phase and the we phase and that kind of collaborative planning, collaborative ideas, using classroom talk as a really important element of supporting students with that challenge of writing, we get to the U phase. And for me, I think silent writing is critical. I think students need an opportunity to be alone with their thoughts in that phase and to struggle and to work it out a little bit. I think that when the writing is done, I think the feedback and as we said, about motivation, feeling like their effort matters. I think it's absolutely critical that students, through the use of learning checklists or through the use of your whole class marking, learn very quickly. And I think that's the momentum. I think they need to know very quickly where they are and where they need to be. So, what's next for them? And I think the redrafting and improving is key as well. Jennifer Webb said something great the other day in her Seneca talk, which was that we need to really teach students that writing is always part of the writing process is always about redrafting and improving. And if we teach students that from the word go, then we are teaching them something really important about writing, and a focus on literacy at the end as well. That when we have that product, that we can then go back and have that opportunity to improve it in terms of the literacy and the polish. So just a list of, I'll move myself here, just a list of do's and don'ts. I mean, I think my key takeaway message, I think, is don't underestimate the challenge of writing, and don't assume because you've taught it that the students will be able to complete the writing, and that there is that need for multiple encounters with different types of writing. Don't be afraid to use product models and process models, and sort of understand that both have a place and both can be used in different ways. And don't forget to use talk as an absolutely essential part of the writing process. The classroom talk really does support students to do all of those things. Plan their ideas, to consider the barriers and the challenges, and all of that can be done collaboratively. So just finally, I love this statement: with repeated modelling, learners can learn anything. And I think if we really believe that, and if we really take that on board, then I think our ambition for our students increases automatically, and then we start to think much more creatively about the modelling process and what it is that we need to do to try and help students get away from that sort of blank piece of paper and that absolute crushing inability to move themselves forward through that writing task. So my name is Kate McCabe, Even Better If, and if you have anything that you want to ask me, please feel free to do so on Twitter. Thank you very much.